Ladies and gentlemen, grab your hats and your whips, your pistols, your rugged handsomeness, because we're back for the Screen Sermon Podcast, and this week I've got Josh back on, and Josh needs to see Indiana Jones, Raider of the Lost Ark. Up to this point, Josh, as we've talked about in the past, you have yet to watch an Indiana Jones film, and we finally broke that for you this past week. So, what was it? What was it that kind of kept you from seeing any of these films up to this point?
It's just kind of, I've always been a one genre person mainly. Not that I haven't watched stuff outside of it, but I haven't touched on a lot of the big franchises, so I'll probably cover them gradually through Screen Sermon. Stuff like Terminator, Lord of the Rings, I haven't really touched.
And I find that outside of the horror genre, there are probably numerous other genre films that I get excited about and that we could probably loop Cody or Jay or Mick into, and all of us kind of do a pile-on of essentially, we can't believe you've seen this, and now we'll all talk to you about it. But this week it is my pleasure to talk to you about Raiders of the Lost Ark. I happen to be a pretty large Indiana Jones fan. I'm actually just a big Harrison Ford fan in general, because, I mean, Blade Runner, the Indiana Jones franchise, and then, of course, Star Wars with Han Solo. I mean, he's just played some of my favorite roles across, my entire life of film viewing. And so I'm a big fan of the character. I like how he mixes intellect with kind of the rugged, badass hero tropes as well. And yeah, Raiders, I find that the Indiana Jones franchise has the opposite of the Star Trek problem. So the long-standing thing with the Star Trek films was that all the even-numbered ones were the good ones. And Indy is the opposite. So Raiders is great. Temple of Doom is kind of meh. Last Crusade is great. And then Crystal Skull is kind of a mess.
That's sort of how I feel about Predator. Only the odd Predator films are the ones worth watching.
Okay. I'm trying to remember what the third Predator was. I know this is an Indiana Jones episode. What was the third Predator? Was that Predators?
Yeah, it was Predators. Predator, Predator 2,
okay.
Predators, The Predator, and then Prey.
Right, okay. And I have yet to watch Prey. I gotta sit down and finally watch that.
Alright, well, before we move on, Prey on par with the first film.
Wow, that's heavy praise.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Okay. I'll have to do a watch of that and then throw one of the graphic reviews that I do up on Twitter and just do it there. Yeah, that's right. Just so everybody knows, Josh is, let's just say, under the weather this week. So he's gonna push through it and get through this episode, but we'll keep it tight and make sure not to overdo it. So yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark was the first in the Indiana Jones franchise. Came out in 1981. It had an $18 million budget. I guess to date, it's worth mentioning, it's grossed almost $400 million worldwide. So that's not, obviously that's not a great indicator of how it did at the time. But this is, up to this point, it's grossed that much. So it definitely made its money back. It's been a successful franchise. That's why we're getting a fifth one this summer, as Harrison Ford kind of continues on his tour of letting his favorite characters that everybody loves kind of get run into the ground a little bit, because that's what it certainly looks like is going to happen in the fifth one. But we'll see. Hopefully the whole odd-numbered entry idea really comes through and that movie ends up actually being great, but it doesn't look like it. So this has the distinction of it's an outstanding adventure film. It's got a real sense of kind of globe-trotting about it, and if you're into the Uncharted games, you certainly see a lot of that influence here. It was directed by Steven Spielberg, and it has some great character actors in it, namely Alfred Molina. He's in the first couple of minutes of this film, and then John Rhys Davies has a pretty large role as well, as Sala, who happens to be basically Indy's good friend that he meets up with in Cairo. So I guess just to kind of get a general sense of how you felt about it, like, what were your thoughts? Like, how did you feel about the film? Was it an easy watch for you? Was it, just give me an idea of how you felt about watching it for the first time.
I don't know how the hell it managed to get a PG rating when it came out. That movie is like decently gory for like a family film.
I had it in my notes that the 80s were just a different time because the PG-13 rating didn't exist yet. And I'm not 100% sure when the outset of the PG-13 rating came about. But, I mean, back in the 80s, there was the difference between R and PG and what was enough to push it over the edge where you had to be 17 or older to watch it. And that basically meant that a lot of these PG films that kids had access to, Indiana Jones included, feature things like dudes getting shot in the head, like right there in frame, or the end of the film when they look into the Ark of the Covenant and people's faces start melting off and their heads explode. There was just it's a lot different these days. There's a lot more safeguards in place to protect kids from seeing things, and I think back in the 80s they hadn't figured these things out yet. There's a lot of brutal stuff in this movie.
Yeah, I know this one, along with Gremlins, are one of the films that caused them to do a PG-13 rating. The first film with that rating, I believe, was Red Dawn.
Okay, I think that was, 86?
Yeah, that sounds right. It might have been 84, actually.
84 is okay.
You mentioned Harrison Ford being like the perfect role for Indiana Jones. One of the few behind-the-scenes tidbits I do know about this film is that he wasn't originally supposed to be the lead in this. The first choice was...
Who was?
The first choice was Tom Selleck, but he had scheduling conflicts because of Magnum PI.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it would have been
Tom Selleck as Indy.
Completely different.
I mean, I like Tom Selleck and all, Mr. Baseball and Richard from Friends. Outside of that, I don't know if a Tom Selleck-led Indiana Jones film would have sold.
For me, I don't think so, because Harrison Ford brought a lot of the same charisma he used to play Han Solo in Star Wars in this performance. Like, there's a lot of parallels between the two characters, and it just worked so well. Yeah.
I mean, he had already kind of gotten that devil may care kind of attitude, but with a heart of gold. He had already gotten that figured out in the previous role. Yeah. But he's awesome in this movie. He knows how to play a character like this. I feel like this is a tried and true Harrison Ford role.
It's the one I first think of when I think of him as an actor, even over Han Solo, even though I've never seen this before.
And that just goes to show you how, culturally important, I guess, this film was, because you can still associate Indiana Jones with Harrison Ford, whether or not you've seen the films, because it's made its way and permeated itself into other forms of media, and you still have interacted with that character, whether you've seen the film or not.
Yeah, it's got a theme park ride, a Lego game, something that I read while looking up just the franchise, because I want to watch the other films and explore the franchise further. There's a set of choose-your-own-adventure style books about Indiana Jones. I'm really curious to see what those are like.
So it sounds like, however you may have felt about the movie, it was at least positive enough to give you the oomph to go ahead and watch the second one, and kind of move on.
Oh yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark was great. It's unfortunate that I hadn't seen it before watching it for the episode.
I agree. Yeah, and I'm glad that we saved it, so that we could obviously do an episode about it. But I was shocked to hear that you hadn't seen it up to this point, just because of. I mean, unfortunately, like if you listen to last week's episode, things can get built up, and then when you watch it, it just doesn't quite live up to the hype. I'm sure you've heard people lauding, Raiders and just how wonderful it is for a good part of your life, and so there was definitely a possibility there that by the time you saw it, it just wouldn't have taken you for the ride that it should have taken you for. But it sounds like that didn't affect it at all.
Oh no, it was a great watch. It reminded me a lot of, and I hadn't watched this film until I got up there in age, like in high school. It reminded me a lot of The Goonies, just because it's like, you know, not a horror film, obviously, but there's like aspects of it where you just straight up see like a corpse or somebody die. Like, you get to see within the first 10 minutes of the film, you get to see Alfred Molina's dead corpse.
Yeah. With a bunch of like blades running through him and stuff.
Yeah.
And this is after you saw Indy's old rival Forrestal. He got killed by the exact same trap, and you got to see his body that had been stuck in that tomb for the longest time. And the I don't know if what would you call it? Is that a puppet that they made for that body? Because it doesn't really move, so I don't know if that counts as a puppet or not.
It might be. There's different ways you can go about it when you're doing that design. Yeah, I like when one of the dudes in the jungle just looks at that like tiki man, just screams and runs away.
Right off the top, just he brushes some greenery aside, and there's a statue or a carving of a face, and he loses his mind. I love in the beginning of the film too. First of all, I thought Alfred Molina's very, short journey that we got with him was interesting. He was kind of a bumbling, almost comedic sidekick character, like the guy that carries the bags. And he very quickly goes from that to being just like the backstabber guy. And I thought that was just really odd. And I kind of thought, for some reason, it had been a while since I had seen the film too. I thought Alfred Molina had a bigger role for some reason.
So did I.
But yeah, he was super young.
Featured in the credits pretty prominently.
Yeah, he's like within the first grouping or two of names after Harrison Ford.
Yeah, so I think this film, it grabbed me from like the first scene, and I don't mean like just the first scene, but like the movie. You hit play on the movie, and then it opens with the Paramount logo, and that fades into a mountain, and that's how it starts the film.
Yeah.
That was a great shot. The first shot of a film grabbing you like that set my expectations even higher than everyone loving it.
I mean, that whole opening sequence is really cool because if you had never seen an Indiana Jones film, you had seen the big giant rolling boulder referenced in something, or you had seen that clip from an Indiana Jones movie without knowing, like, I don't know which one's this from exactly, or if it is from the first one, it must happen near the end or something like that. It's like, no, this is just him on one of his kind of routine artifact finds so that he can sell it to the museum so that it's kept safely and with people who respect the history behind it and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, they give you this awesome sequence right off the jump of him basically puzzle solving, trying to get around traps. Like, I don't know how the hell the light trap works where you can't touch the sunlight that's coming through. Who knows how or why that releases those bladed, like the blade trap that comes out of the wall. I don't know how these folks figured all this engineering stuff out, in the ancient times when these ruins were built, but either way, you get it right off the jump of him trying to get around these trap-filled rooms in this chamber, and then of course you get the rolling ball sequence at the end. Just an iconic moment, and they give it to you in the first 10 minutes, and it really hooks you in.
Yeah, I appreciate how it does that thing that I often bitch about in films, it doesn't do, rather, where it's don't tell me, show me, because there's no real exposition setting that up. You just get thrown right into it, which I appreciate, because you don't treat the audience like they're stupid. It's just, him going about one of his expositions, not the main one featured in the film, but just, one of them, and then we just take off from there. I didn't know, I had no idea that Raiders took place in 1936. I thought it took place like in the 80s, even though I knew that there were Nazis in the film. I still had no idea it was like, because they're like, there's plenty of films about Nazis in the modern day. Sure. So I thought it was just like, okay, well, we're in the 80s, and here's, some group of people who...
Neo-Nazis?
Yeah. That's the word I was looking for. I had no idea, and evidently they all take place in the 30s.
The original trilogy is like within that World War II time frame.
It doesn't feel very 1930s though. It still somehow feels 80s. That might be due to how they filmed it, the film equipment.
Mm-hmm.
But something about it just doesn't feel like it's set in the 1930s.
I see. I kind of get what you're saying. I don't know if more of it took place in America, because there's only 2 or 3 scenes that take place in the States, and the rest of it is supposed to be either South America or Cairo or Nepal.
The dialogue.
Those are like the 3 big locales.
It's kind of more modern than I would have assumed anyway.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. Yeah.
Like,
they don't talk to each other like that.
I wish I had a good example. Alright, well, films from the 1930s, there's a certain cadence in which the characters would speak, and they'd talk a certain way, and that doesn't come across at all in Raiders.
That's fair. It's more modernized.
Indiana Jones is essentially a superhero. I know that there was a Mythbusters episode when he like wraps his whip around the thing and plays Pitfall for a second.
Yeah.
I know that there was a Mythbusters episode that evidently proved that is possible. So a lot of movie characters have like their signature, for lack of a better word, weapon. You know, something that like, if you're selling toys of a character, it comes with this. It's really interesting that they were like, let's give this guy a whip.
I guess it was the utility of it, because he can use it to swing around, and he could also use it to disarm foes and stuff like that.
It's super cool because of how skilled he is with it.
Yeah.
That whole...
I'd love to know how that happened. Like, how did he learn how to use a whip? And why?
They have I don't know anything about it, but there is Young Indiana Jones. That whole... I think it's a TV series.
Yeah, that series was on when I was a kid. I gotta say, I haven't seen a single episode of it. I have no clue what that show's about.
It's on there, and I'll probably check that out eventually, too. Just gradually.
Yeah.
Not all at once, so that's a little overwhelming. Even though the first film looked good, I don't want to oversaturate it.
Yeah, sure.
But that whole opening segment, even though I had never seen this movie before, I still feel like I've seen that whole scene because of how iconic it is with the rolling boulder and him eyeballing the weight of the idol and then removing sand from the bag and then putting it on there. Which I wrote when I was making notes. I wrote a few notes just of thoughts. And I wrote, how the hell can he tell the weight just by eyeballing it? And then my next note is, never mind, he can't.
Not very well. Yeah, I mean, it's just that he's super intelligent. Like, he's a highly intelligent character. But, so you could see him, like, he definitely was eyeballing it and trying to determine, like, well, if it's made of this, and it's that size, it's probably about this many grams or something like that. And then he's holding that bag. Like, you could see him trying to figure it out. I appreciate that they took the time to kind of film him doing that. But yeah, I mean, that would be so difficult. How the hell would you be able to figure that out?
And not to mention that by the way, whoever set all that up, that was an extremely elaborate Jigsaw-esque bunch of booby traps they had there. Like, they were really protecting that ugly ass idol.
Which, it's hilarious because, as we come to find out, that idol that they find has nothing to do with anything related to the main plot of the film. So it's not like it's some important piece that you connect with multiple other pieces to create something that could cause, doom to mankind or something. It's literally just a gold idol that someone put there long ago. And actually, the main villain in the film, Balak, ends up basically saying the same thing when they meet up at after this initial heist, when him and his men catch up to Indy, and he ends up taking the idol for himself. And he basically tells him, he says, this pocket watch I have is worth $10. I bought it for $10. But if I take it out in the desert somewhere, bury it, and leave it there for 10,000 years, or I'm sorry, it was 1,000 years, by the time somebody finds it, it'll be priceless. And that's essentially what they did with the first scene in the film. It's like this idol inevitably doesn't do anything and wasn't really worth much when they made it, 2,000 years ago. But the fact that somebody put it in this room and put a bunch of traps in front of it to keep you from getting to it, and the fact that nobody has known where it is for all this time, makes it super valuable.
I liked Belloc as a villain, played by Paul Freeman.
Me too.
Something about him, just a lot of his mannerisms, he looks like a villain. His name even evokes a certain emotion, like the same way Stephen King names characters when he names them shit like Randall Flagg. You hear them Belloc, and you just kind of assume things about the character without him even being on screen.
I also like that he's essentially the dark version of Indy. Like they're very much similar characters, but he's like the dark side version, where he's willing to push it that extra edge. He's willing to do that extra level of underhandedness and cheating and lying and backstabbing and killing. And as we know, he doesn't steal these artifacts to then sell them or give them willingly to the museum to be kept in a place where they'll be respected and treated with reverence or anything like that. He'll sell them to anybody. And so right there at the beginning of the film, Indy's talking about, well, I know where I gotta go because there's only one place Belloc can sell that, and that's in Marrakesh. And it's like he must have a fence or somebody that lives in Marrakesh, and that's the only person who would buy this thing. So he doesn't really care about the artifacts as much as he cares about whatever it is. Maybe it's the hunt for him, maybe it's the money, I don't know.
Yeah, you have the one person doing it for valor and one person doing it just for cash. There's a nice parallel there.
Yeah.
Two characters juxtaposing each other like that with the same goal but for different interests.
Right.
And
so I really like Belloc.
Yeah. Well, I mean yeah, I like him as a character, but I don't support his beliefs.
Yeah, not personally.
Well,
I don't think we'd get along. I'm just looking through Paul Freeman's filmography, and fun fact, he was Ivan Ooze in the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie.
I don't know. I recognize him from. I mean, we'll touch on what the scene is in particular, but there's a scene that I've seen from this film that's very popular. It's probably one of the first scenes you think of when you think of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I knew him from that scene, so I immediately knew when he popped up on screen what was going to happen to him at the end of the movie.
Right. And it isn't going to be good.
Yeah.
Well, for him, it'll be good for us.
Yeah. The boulder scene, like that whole temple, it was in I believe Peru, the first scene. The whole thing is just iconic shot after iconic shot. Ending with I thought it was pretty funny. You see him running from the tribe. Jock's got the plane in the river, and he's just kind of fishing off of it, just standing there fishing off of the seaplane.
He hesitates for a second. He's like, I'm pretty sure I can pull this fish in before I have to do anything. And then when Indy yells at him again, he's like, all right, and he just lets it go. Yeah,
and then when they take off and Indy's complaining that there's a snake in the plane, and I was like, oh, well, that sets up his fear for later, because I know that's not just a throwaway line.
It's just amazing for a guy that has a phobia about snakes. He's sitting in a small plane seat with one at his feet, I guess. You never really see where it is, but you're assuming it's at his feet.
Yeah, and then the following line is just like, oh yeah, that's just my pet.
Yeah, his name's like Reggie or something.
Yeah, he says, oh, that's just my pet snake, Reggie. And he's just a Jake Snake type character. He's just got a snake just chilling in the plane. That he's shipped to Peru with him, I guess.
So as we come to find out, Belloc is so basically the premise that we get to is Indy is trying to find the headpiece to the staff of Ra, because they are trying to uncover a chamber, an area called Tanis in Cairo, and there's a room called the Well of Souls, and it's supposed to contain the Ark of the Covenant. And the Staff of Ra is supposed to be used in order to find where you're supposed to dig to find it. And of course, Hitler being very much interested in the occult and trying to gain supernatural powers and make his army undefeatable and all that stuff, they want to find the Ark of the Covenant. And so there's a contingency of Nazis looking for this medallion. And Balak, as we come to find out, is working for them.
That wasn't
in order to help them find it. No, him loving the occult?
Yeah, Hitler was like there's a lot of stuff about him when people think of like him through history being this like genius evil dictator. No, he was a fucking idiot.
Yeah. He was a kook.
I think he was like on meth or something too. It was some substance that he was a fan of. Which, retrospect isn't too surprising.
Well, he gets depicted a lot, or maybe not him, but Nazis get depicted a lot as being involved in the occult. Like, you look at Hellboy, for example, is another one. And I feel like, I know you're not a Marvel person, but or the Marvel films anyway, the MCU, but the depictions of Hydra and Hydras clearly influenced by the Nazi Party and things like that, and all of their stuff is very much around occult dealings and finding like the Tesseract and things like that in order to give them more power. And of course in the MCU all of this stuff is real, but a lot of the Nazi depictions in like action and genre films, of course, not war epics, but in more of the genre movies, they will lean into that Nazi occultism.
I'd say that they were real in the universe of this film too, given what happens in it.
That's fair. That's very fair. And they also set that up because Indy basically talks to, who was it, Warren, the guy that he works with at the museum. It was either him or when he was talking to Sala at one point, he basically says, I don't believe in any of the superstitious like hokum.
They mentioned though that Indy is also an expert on the occult when he's in the university.
So I suppose in his doctoral program, as he became Indiana Jones, he had to study the occult quite a bit, probably to understand the cultures and stuff, so that he could, get past traps and understand puzzles and things that were being created by people who believed in it a lot.
Yeah,
that would be my guess.
Chasing after the Ark of the Covenant, which. Well, I'll get into more about the Ark of the Covenant later, but in this film, it's rumored to have the power of God, and in the movie, you see that. So there is, I don't know about the rest of the film because I haven't seen them yet, but there is some type of I don't know if I'd necessarily call like religious stuff supernatural, but I will in this instance, for lack of a better word. But there is a bit of like supernatural undertones going on in the movie. Yeah, since there's it's real. It's not just a superstition.
That's true. Like there's spirits and like there's magical energies and things like that radiate off of the Ark and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, in the context of the Indiana Jones franchise, things that are outside the norm are real. They're not just assumed or treated as being nothing more than superstition. Maybe at first because of his line of saying, I don't really believe in that stuff. But yeah, by the end of the movie, you see that all that stuff comes to pass.
They don't really elaborate, or maybe they did and I didn't catch it, but I don't think they really elaborated after moving on to like the next couple scenes what the previous relationship was between Marion and Indy, other than they had a relationship once. Yeah.
So the thing that I get, and they kind of tease it a little bit in the scene after the opener when he's teaching, Indy is the teacher that all the gals want to bang.
Right.
And Like all the gals have their heads in their hands, like staring at him dreamily while he's giving his lecture. You got the one girl with "Love You" written on her eyelids, and she keeps blinking at him like real hard so that he makes sure to read it. And it is very much assumed after he has his conversation, when he travels to Nepal, after he but gets the museum to fund his trip to Cairo. Him and Marion reunite, and they have they have it out with one another because Marion's pissed at him. It is very much put out there on Front Street that Marion, I think, was a student of his, and she basically comes at it from an angle of like, it was super inappropriate for you to do what you did, like take advantage of essentially his position to seduce her and stuff like that. And Indy takes it from a place of like, you were an adult, you knew what you were getting into, you know, you're basically just as culpable for this as I am, kind of thing, and kind of trying to maybe not pass the blame off on her, but at least even it out and say like, maybe it was a mistake on both of our parts, but don't put it all on me. A little bit cringy, and definitely like in today's society, that whole thing probably would have been shit all over. Like it probably would not have flown very well with, you know, the Me Too movement and things like that. It would not have been. I don't even think it would have been in the film. I don't think they would have filmed that at all or written it.
I mean, it's
because Marion essentially is
very long. Yeah. It's just kind of like there's like one line that there's a lot of subtext behind, and it's like, wait, what the hell's going on there? So I feel like there was more, but they cut it out.
And she punches him and basically tells him, you know, I've got the medallion, the head of the staff of Ra that you're looking for, because my father gave it to me a long time ago, or she took it from her father. It's kind of unclear. And, you know, basically once she works in a tavern, and once her tavern gets burned down because the Nazis find them there and try to get the medallion from Marion, it also burns the little box of money that she had, including the down payment that Indy had given her. And so essentially she lets him know right there and then, you're stuck with me until I get my money, essentially saying you're going to pay me for this thing. I'm not just going to give it to you. But, you know, it, like you said, the animosity between them doesn't last. I mean, hell, by the time they're in Cairo, which is the next transition, basically, they're already buddy and, you know, relying on one another for support and all this other stuff.
The score of this entire film is fantastic. Every piece of music, not just the iconic ones, but the ones that I've never heard before watching it, everything in it was great. John Williams evidently did it. You know, he's the same guy who did Star Wars, Jaws, Jurassic Park, Home Alone, all those big movie themes that everyone loves. And I told you that this wasn't Lucasfilm because I didn't think it was, but yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I don't know what the rights issues were, why it's on Paramount Plus. I mean, it is a Paramount film, so that makes sense, but I don't know what's going on with the rights.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was on Disney and then they give it to Paramount for a certain amount of time and then they get it back. I have no clue.
So, because it being Lucasfilm, you'd think that it would be on Disney Plus since they own it.
Yeah.
I guess it's a collaborative effort, so they kind of split it. But then, why is Star Wars on there? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe because Star Wars wasn't put out by a studio like Paramount.
I don't know. I cannot begin to fathom the film rights issues and distribution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So,
outside of the scandal regarding their relationship, how did you take Marion's character?
She was fine. Despite her not... They tried their damnedest to not portray her as such and have her be somewhat competent, but she still came off a lot of damsel in distress-esque, especially in later scenes in the movie.
Yeah, I feel like she starts out great. She's got a foul mouth on her. She drinks, she swears, she fights, she smokes. Like, she's portrayed less as like quote unquote ladylike and more rough around the edges and more, willing to get into the thick of things. Like when we meet her character, she's in a drinking competition with a local from Nepal, and drinks this big dude under the table, and proves herself to be able to stay in there in situations, without needing to be rescued and all this other stuff. But I would say by the halfway point of the film and then on after that, it's like you're saying, she essentially turns into somebody who does need to be saved for the most part. She occasionally will get in a good shot here and there. If they're in the middle of a Donnybrook with a group of guys, she'll bash somebody over the head with a big log or something like that, and save Indy.
She knocked out one dude with a frying pan at one point.
Oh, that's right. That's right. On the streets of Cairo, she lures him into a building, and he's got a knife, and she blasts him with a frying pan. All you get's the sound effect. You don't get to see it, but you get to hear it. And then she drags his body inside, which I thought was actually probably the most impressive part of that.
Oh yeah, it was the slapstick in this film. You see it every once in a while. It's very Scooby-Doo-esque.
Yeah.
I think that Marion becomes more of a backseat character instead of being like a secondary character that the minute they introduced Sala into the film.
Yeah. That's fair.
He kind of takes up the wasn't there supposed to be a tiny Asian child in this movie or am I misremembering that?
You're thinking of the next one.
Oh, all right. Because, I haven't seen any of these, so my knowledge of Indiana Jones is not it's all meshed together. I could have sworn that there was, I was waiting for him to pop up, but then he never did, and I was like, what the hell?
Yeah. Temple of Doom has the little Asian boy in it. Short Round, as he is come to be known.
I felt bad about
That's what Indy calls him.
Yeah, I felt bad about calling him Little Asian Boy because I didn't know his name. I don't feel particularly great about calling him Short Round either.
Actually, that whole bar fight scene in Nepal is one of my favorite scenes in the movie just because of the lighting they use. All of the fire and the torches and stuff like that, and the way it casts shadows on the wall, and how a lot of the time they end up showing some of the violence that happens to the characters, they show it happening to the shadow instead of to the character themselves. I just thought those were some cool decisions.
Yeah, but I don't think they not that it matters because it's a movie, but I feel like there's a lot of times where the torch placement inside, it didn't make sense for them to act that way.
Mm.
If you're an you know what? Never mind. We did the science thing on the last episode I was on. We're not going to get into this again.
Yeah, you and I got to stop while we're ahead talking about science. Notable to say that, and lest we forget, that Short Round was played by Ke Huy Quan, who just won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor from Everything Everywhere All at Once. What? So, yeah, that was kind of this guy's beginnings.
That was him?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, Ke Huy Quan was Short Round, and he went on to be Waymond Wong in Everything Everywhere All at Once,
which is one of the best films of last year, in my opinion.
It was awesome. It was my favorite movie from last year for sure.
Yeah,
and I saw it.
The only thing I had ranked above it was the Batman.
Yeah, you were really high on the Batman.
Yeah, it's just exactly what how you felt when Dark Knight came out, where this is exactly what I want in a Batman film. That's how I felt about the Batman. It's actually on par with Dark Knight for me, because it feels like they took an episode of the Batman the Animated Series and just made it 3 hours long into a film.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. I liked it a lot. Let's talk about Sala as another side character. So what we come to know about Sala is that he's the best person to get if you need something dug up out of the ground. He's the best one you can find in Cairo, and he is kind of a mole within the Nazi search for the head of the staff of Ra, and Tanis and the Well of Souls and things like that. So he keeps reporting back to Indy. They're clearly old friends. So what did you think of his character and who he was played by, if you have any kind of knowledge about him?
I don't remember the actor.
Okay.
Is
so
John something?
So before yeah, so I was going to say, before you get into what you think about Sala, he's played by John Rhys Davies, who was Gimli in the Lord of the Rings films. So he was a dwarf in the Lord of the Rings films. He is not Egyptian. I know that's probably not a surprise.
I haven't seen the Lord of the Rings films either yet, so
yeah, we'll get there.
That's definitely a future episode. So
absolutely, yeah. So he's Welsh. He's not from Egypt. He's Welsh, but he's playing an Egyptian man named Sala.
He's just straight Welsh. He's not descendant from another nationality or something.
I don't believe so. I think he's just Welsh.
This is a big no-no.
Yes.
But did they paint his face?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh.
I think that's all makeup.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. Again, there's a lot of things about, and see, that this was made in a different time, and so while I see the issues, right, I understand the issues of doing these kinds of things now instead of just finding an Egyptian actor, and finding somebody who's, who could use a boost to their career, who happens to be from Egypt and stuff like that, makes more sense. I'm not going to condemn a movie that came out in 1981, before a lot of this kind of stuff became more, that it needed to be considered now. It needed to be considered then, but there weren't enough people talking about it back then. There wasn't things like social media to really bring a lot of this stuff to light. I assume, I don't know John Rhys Davies personally, but I assume he did not do this from any kind of bad place, like he wanted to take the role away from an Egyptian actor. But yeah, a Welsh actor played an Egyptian character. He, puts on a fake accent and all of the above. That being said, he's a very lovable character.
Yeah, I like
the
character. Sala is great. I hope he appears in the next film or two, because he's just a good, I wouldn't call him a sidekick, because he's kind of on par. He's just less featured in the film.
Yeah.
If they made
he's not the focus
of Sala, I'd completely understand why they were doing that, because he's got enough merits on his own right to warrant it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I thought he was a pretty strong character. You need somebody like that for Indy and Harrison Ford as Indy to bounce off of. Because if it's just one-note characters, and I'm sorry, Marion, but by this point, she kind of becomes that. You need more than that. Because otherwise, you pretty much just have Belloc and Arnold Tote, I think, is how you pronounce that. Is that how you pronounce it?
Arnold Tote.
The
who does he play?
The other villain that's not...
Oh, like the interrogator guy?
Yeah. Is that...
I'm never sure what his name is.
I just looked it up for a second, and I don't know if that's correct or not. But there's the other, the secondary antagonist. It might have been Toad. It might be. It might not. I might be pulling that out of my ass. But that's the name.
I know, the main...
Looked it up briefly.
The main Nazi commander that Balak is reporting to most of the time, his name is Dietrich, but the dude in the big leather trench coat or leather duster coat and the hat and stuff like that, I've never known his name.
Dietrich's what I'm talking about. I went on Letterboxd and I was just looking at where the actors were featured, and I saw Ronald Lacey played Major Arnold Tote.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, Colonel Dietrich.
Okay.
Which was also a solid character, even though I couldn't remember his name.
Yeah, well, they don't use it a ton, in the film.
Yeah, that's why I got confused, because I wanted to say this guy without saying, this guy.
Right.
Tried to be.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it for you in terms of, who returns, who doesn't return, and stuff like that for future installments.
I might because I can't imagine we're doing like Temple of Doom and the other ones as episodes.
Mm-hmm.
I might do I might post them on the socials with the ranking, the rating. I mean,
and so we touched on this last week when Jay and Mick and I talked about The Crow. I meant to put this in the. We're going to do a little inside baseball real quick on the show. I meant to post this in our kind of group chat that we have where we talk about the show. My intention moving forward is to get through our schedule the way that we currently have it listed out. We have episodes planned through August 6th. And so once those are done, I consider that kind of the end of season 1 of the Screen Sermon podcast. And then I want to start... I've enjoyed doing one movie.
Right.
Just let's do one movie a week, or a review of something a week. Like the ranking episodes, for example, are hard because you have to watch 5-6 movies in a week's time, and and then talk about them and try to condense that down into a show that is digestible. And so we're going to take a page out of another one of my favorite shows on the internet, podcast. I mean, I watch it on YouTube, but I know it's a podcast as well. And that's OSW Review. And they do things in the format of arcs. And so they'll start, we're going to do the arc of, the era of Hulkamania in the 80s and, stuff like that. And they'll take it one episode at a time. They'll do one, seminal Hulk Hogan pay-per-view, and then they'll go to the next one, and the next one. So I want to do it like that. If we're going to do series, I would like to let's do the Child's Play arc, and then we'll literally watch every movie in the franchise and the series, as much of it that we can watch, and then each week we can do an episode per movie, or an episode that's dedicated just to the series. And then in the middle, we can still do our coming soons. We can still do international film reviews that are not part of that arc. We can do pop-in, like version versus version episodes just to break it up a little bit. And so an arc might take us 2 months, 3 months, whatever. Doesn't matter. And then at the end of that arc, we can say, okay, we're done with Child's Play. Now we're going to move on to, whatever, the next one. And so with that in mind, Indiana Jones, I think, is definitely an arc that we should explore later. So we can do another episode on Raiders and just have more people on it, because it won't be a needs to see, and we can all kind of just chat about it. So that's the concept moving forward, just to kind of give a very impromptu stop to our talk about Raiders of the Lost Ark. So
I mean, you talked
that's there you go. There you go. So I think that's going to work, because then we can kind of do a real tight focus on a single film, get these episode lengths down, because I do recognize, and we've gotten some comments on YouTube and stuff about, like, wow, these are just really long. And to a certain degree, it's been appreciated, specifically like on the Indian film reviews that we've done, because there's been some appreciation about, Westerners taking a good look at these movies and appreciating them and not just trashing them. But at the same time, I do want to take that feedback and make these episodes more digestible for folks. So I think this is a good way to do it. Instead of tackling an entire franchise in a single episode, we'll do it over a span of time. And then maybe at the end of the arc, we can do a ranking where we literally just do a round table, go around and talk about rankings and why, without the need of breaking down each and every single film. And so with that in mind, I think inevitably we'll end up doing like a Scream arc and an Evil Dead arc as well, just to bring those back full circle. But we'll give it a while. We'll give it a year or two or something, and then come back to them.
Before we jump right back into Raiders of the Lost Ark, I will say that along with you, I do also read all the comments on the YouTube channel, when the videos, and appreciate any recommendations, especially if they're international and stuff that I wouldn't normally watch if, like, I didn't even hear about it. I'm interested in, it's mainly you and Cody right now, but I'm interested in being on some of those in the future.
definitely.
So,
Yeah, I mean, Cody and I kind of we're like the de facto ones. I know that in June we're not doing an Indian film. We're going to do a film from Mexico, and that you and I are on that one.
was it Mexican? I thought it was Spain.
Was it Spain? For some reason, I thought it was Mexico. Maybe I'm thinking of something else about it that mentioned Mexico. I don't remember.
Oh, I could look it up real quick.
But yeah, we're gonna move on to, like, we're gonna continue this concept of, like, we're gonna do an international film.
Spain.
It is Spain. Okay, my apologies. So it's, we're gonna make sure to do at least one international film every month. We're just gonna switch it up and go to some different regions and things like that. We've done India 3 times in our first 10 episodes, which I think is great because I think it's gotten people switched on to the fact that, we're going to be taking a look at movies that are outside of, our own purview, being American and things like that. So, but yeah, we're going to kind of globe trot around a little bit ourselves, much like Indy.
Yeah, way to bring it back.
You're welcome. Segue my ass right back in there. So Sala, the character, I had one thing. I like him. I think he's a great character. The one shitty thing about him is when Marion is presumed dead when the truck explodes that she was tossed into. She was in a wicker basket and got tossed in the back of a truck, and it ends up exploding during an action sequence in the city. Indy is, obviously down in the dumps and stuff. He's ready to go, have a shootout with Balak right there in the middle of a crowded restaurant. And a bunch of kids, I don't know if they're Sala's kids or his nephews and nieces or a combination of all of those things.
How the hell did they know they weren't in there when that happened?
No, but they, somehow or another, they knew what was going down, and they usher Indy out of there before he just kind of has a suicide mission with just basically letting the Nazis gun him down because he's so sad about Marion dying.
And also, how did they know that, like, he's a Nazi, so there's nothing saying that they wouldn't kill children.
Right.
That could have backfired completely. It could have been like 10 fatalities instead of just the one.
Right.
So, by the way, Marion died in that explosion. There is no if, but she was in the basket. She was screaming the entire time she was carried away. It explodes, and then Mario warp pipes away somehow. She's like, "Oh yeah, I was in a different basket." Like, no, you were.
Yeah, I switched baskets. Well, I think the most messed up part about it, though, is Sala. He basically, like, is trying to commiserate with Indy about his sadness and, like, clapping him on the back, be like, "It's all right, man, it's all right." And his line is literally, "Life goes on."
Not for
it's
her,
like,
though.
What? Not if you were in that truck. Oh no, they're all dead.
This is around the same time that I think we get one of the 2 most iconic scenes out of the film that weren't in the first scene, where the one dude's waving his sword around and Indy looks at him, pulls out his gun, shoots him, and he looks real fucking smug as he walks away.
He does.
That was awesome.
He looks a little annoyed. He looked a little annoyed at first, like, come on, like, let's get on with it, and then he just shoots the guy.
Yeah. That's such a...
He's like, I don't have time for this.
I mean, you could look at that in 2 ways. You could see that as A, cowardly, or which I disagree with, or I thought it was badass because he was just like, you're not worth it.
Yeah.
You're not worth
the time it would take.
Yeah, like, I got bigger shit to deal with than worrying about getting into a sword fight. And then following that is when Marion knocks the dude out with a frying pan, and you have your Scooby-Doo moment. And then she dies in the truck. I maintain
and what we, of course,
that she could have died there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little flimsy of an excuse to say like, oh no, she swapped which basket she was sitting in at the last second or something. It's like, I understand that there were a lot of baskets out on the street because Indy's running around basically pulling everybody's laundry off their heads. And when he's trying to uncover which one she's in because she's screaming for him and stuff like that. But it's not like there was another basket just off to the side outside of the truck, like away from it, that she could have dove into. Like, she gets tossed in the back and she's very clearly in the back in the basket, and then the truck takes off. So yeah.
I thought the idea of having the medallion burnt into the hand was a really neat plot way of having them also retain the same information that Indiana Jones would have. However, when they talk about like these are the measurements that you need, and then you flip it over on the back and they're like, except for this, also take this off, remove this. And it was like, why would they add an addendum to the other side?
It was probably when they were creating the medallion, they mismeasured, and they were like, yeah, you gotta have a 6-foot stick, and they already engraved it in there. And then one of the other buddies that was setting up the map room came in and like, no, idiot, it's 5 feet. And they were like, oh shit, well, what are we gonna do now?
I can't remember how they worded it, but they were like, remove like this much for God or something.
It was essentially like, remove a foot for the gods or something like that.
Yeah, that's a cop-out. That's
such a cop-out. Those guys that put the map room together said, oh god, what are we gonna do now? And then one of the real smart one probably was like, why don't we just put it on the other side and just say like, it's for God or something. They'll fucking buy it. Just carve it in there.
Imagine you're putting together IKEA furniture, and you have this set of instructions, and it's like, by the way.
By the way, remember when we said put those dowels in those holes? Yeah, take them out.
Yeah,
take that drawer apart.
Very few things that took me out of the film, and it's such a small thing. Like I'm nitpicking. It's not a big deal. It's just something I thought was silly. Just like how in the scene where Indy's digging out the temple, it's like very clearly a green screen right there. Yeah. It's one of the only few scenes in there where like, because they had a decent budget, but that scene, was a oof.
It was an odd story beat too, because you're gonna tell me that once he completes the map room scene, which was another cool scene, and now he knows where to dig, and he grabs this contingency of like Egyptian dudes to come and help him dig it up. They're not that far away from the actual dig site where the Nazis are set up, and for some reason just nobody notices that there's on the crest of this other hill is a bunch of dudes digging. Like, nobody thinks about it. And then, of course, a few scenes later, they know, but it's too late by then.
Have you heard the, It's been a thing, for a long time, but it was popularized in recent years by the Big Bang Theory. The theory of, like, if Indiana Jones wasn't in the film, it would have turned out exactly the same.
No, I haven't heard that.
I have to try to explain that. It was that... I was hoping you did, so I didn't have to go through this.
No, I've never heard it.
Oh, that's alright. Well, you can cut this out while I'm looking this up.
Well, I'm trying to think of how that would be, because he's the one that knew... Because, like, the army... Or, like, the military officials that kind of give Indy the kind of starting breadcrumbs that starts this whole thing about searching for the Ark of the Covenant. It was that they came to him because he knows Abner Ravenwood.
Yeah, but I think the thing was that they would have, regardless of, they would have still, because in the film, even though like what happened and was really fortunate, in many aspects the Nazis came out on top in the film. They wanted the Ark. Their goal was to get the Ark. They succeeded in getting it. The argument was that if he wasn't in the film, there would be nothing stopping them from getting the Ark anyway, so regardless, they would have opened it.
That's fair. I would say without Indy's help, or without Indy's interference, the Ark may have stayed, I guess, in the desert in Cairo instead of ending up in U.S. hands, because now, of course, as we find out at the end of the film, jumping ahead a little bit, it ends up in a crate in a warehouse full of other relics.
Well, my critique of that theory is that the film, in recent years, because it was originally just called Raiders of the Lost Ark, is Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's about Indiana Jones's journey. If you remove him from the equation, then it's not an Indiana Jones movie. You don't get all the iconic scenes. You just kind of get Nazis dying, which is still good, but it doesn't make for a very good movie.
Well, and it could have been done because if you'll remember back to the title card of the film, they never say Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. The title card is literally just Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, that was done in retroactively, like how Star Wars was just Star Wars, and now it's Episode 4.
Well, Episode 4, A New Hope, is included in the crawl at the beginning. So even though the title card at the beginning of Star Wars is Star Wars, it's after that, once they do the little crawl that gets you into the... I know you haven't seen it. Or
I've seen it.
You haven't seen it, right?
I have.
Okay. You remember in the beginning crawl, it says Episode 4 at the top.
That was...
It doesn't say A New Hope, but it says Episode 4.
Yeah, but wasn't that a George Lucas addendum for home releases? Because... like, they didn't originally plan for a prequel trilogy. They didn't know that this would be the 4th film in the saga.
I always heard that George wrote those original 3 knowing that the ideas he had for the first 3 parts of the story, the technologies just didn't exist yet. And so he wanted to wait, and he wanted to do the middle 3 first.
I don't know if
that's what I heard.
That doesn't make sense to me, because if you're like, you've never... Star Wars is brand new, you're going to the theaters... and you see Star Wars Episode 4 on the big screen, you're like, well, what the hell happened to the first 3?
This would be a question for Wob and Brandy, because they're the Star Wars experts.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll give them a ring at some point and be like, clear this up in the chat, probably.
Yeah.
What the hell are we talking
I mean, it could have been a revisionist history thing. We're talking about Indiana Jones.
Yeah, but I want to... What was I talking about before that? I lost my train.
You were talking about how you could remove Indy from the movie and it would end up just the same.
Oh, right. Yeah, okay, so this is just about... This is more about, like, Indiana Jones and his arc and his journey. So, yeah, there's some things in the film that kind of don't go anywhere. I get the poison date scene was fine, but it just kind of ended up in a monkey dying.
Yeah, a Nazi monkey, which I don't understand why they kept that monkey around. He was clearly a mole, giving info to that other guy who ended up giving the info to the Nazis, and then they still just let him hang around. Sala let him hang around the house.
Nazi monkeys sounds like a asylum film.
It does.
Yeah, but like it was the dates were poisoned. The monkey mistakenly ate them. The monkey died, and he goes, "Bad dates," and that was the end of the bit. I was like, "All right, well that didn't need to be there."
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of some
just for the joke,
some some filler of just like the competing, the competing side, because everybody's on the same hunt for the Covenant or the Ark of the Covenant. Then maybe we can have one of our assassins take Indy out, because without Indy, they'll never find it.
Oh, and so when Indy goes into the temple and it's filled with snakes afterwards, and Sala goes, "They're asps. They're very dangerous. You go first."
The best part about that whole thing, though, is when Indy gets down into the chamber and he comes face to face with a cobra. I'm like, that's not an asp.
Oh yeah, I think some of the ones in the scene, they used legless lizards, which not only aren't snakes but aren't venomous, and I don't think they even bite.
I mean, wouldn't surprise me.
I'm not a herpetologist, so
I just knew I definitely recognized some constrictors in there, and I definitely recognized a couple of cobras, and I love that Sala looked down and he goes, "Asps," and I guess I can't say he's wrong, because he wasn't saying those are all asps, but he definitely made it sound like he was saying there's nothing but asps down there. And the first snake you really see is a cobra, and you're like, well, I guess that makes you a liar, doesn't it?
Just a pile of snakes, too.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the line that kind of sets that up when he's like, "Why is the floor moving?" And then they kind of shine the torch down there, or they drop the torch down there.
Yeah, actually, that was pretty cool. Because I knew what that was going to be because of not because of ever watching Indiana Jones, but because it's such like a pop culture thing. You kind of certain notes come up, and you're like, "Oh yeah, this is the part where this happens." So I was like, "Oh yeah." A combination of the earlier throwaway line about Indiana Jones hating snakes, which, despite that, his fears seemed to go away pretty quick, because I didn't see much of him being afraid of snakes thing there. He handled it well.
Yeah. I mean, just like the scene earlier with Reggie, the snake in the plane, he seems to handle his phobia all right.
Forgot his name was Reggie already.
Two other scenes that I wanted to point out. One is the fist fight that he gets into with the Nazi brute with the airplane.
Right under a fucking propeller.
Yeah, that's another pretty iconic moment from the film. And he's getting the shit beat out of him in that sequence. And Marion ends up kind of saving the day when she jumps into the gunner's seat and removes the blocks, and the plane starts turning around in circles. That's just a cool like set. Like, I love that they came up with that idea when putting the film together. I just thought that was a cool idea to have this active piece of danger that's moving around in your space as you're trying to fight this guy, and he's clearly physically getting the best of him, so he needed that other angle to help him get out of there.
I don't know who the stunt coordinator is, but the entire third act has fantastic, like the whole movie. But the third act, the stunts really shined.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much. It's just rapid fire. Even in the background, you see shit happening.
Yeah. One of my big notes that I took about the car chase scene is there's a trail of gasoline that gets set ablaze and it leads to a big explosion. The camera, other than giving you the initial like point of view shot to let you know, hey, there's gas on the ground, as soon as it ignites, it doesn't ever go back to showing that in focus anymore, because it stays on Indy and Marion, but you get to watch the trail grow behind them as it's following the truck and it's going along in the background. It's very visible, but it's never in focus. I thought that was really cool. And then the explosion happens in the background as well. They don't make it a point to like, oh, let's cut to it so we can show it, basically fully in focus. They just let it be in the background while they focus on the leads, which I thought was a really cool decision, and it makes for a really cool shot. There's a lot of depth in the shot that way.
I also think it's interesting that the way the plot progresses, and this is not really a bad thing or a good thing, I just find it interesting that the Nazis, the antagonists in the film, seem to have Indy's number like throughout it, because they keep finding ways to essentially one-up him. And it breaks away from, because this film came out in 81, I think. Yep. It breaks away from the formula that's so well established, where you have your clean-cut good guy that overcomes all obstacles. Because despite Indy being a badass throughout the film, he gets his ass kicked and he gets
a whole bunch.
He they get the best of him basically.
When I like it, he kind of addresses that himself, because when Marion's patching him up after the car chase sequence, because Indy gets shot in that scene, he gets shot in the shoulder, and then Nazi guy ends up jumping back into the front seat of the truck that Indy's driving, and he starts punching him in his bullet wound, or his gunshot wound, I mean. He punches him in his already shot arm like 3 or 4 times just to, get him out of the driver's seat, which I thought was a really cool and like effective idea if you're in close quarters combat with somebody like that. Well, afterwards, she's patching him up when they're on Katanga's ship, and she says some line about like, you're not the same man you were 10 years ago or something like that, and his line was, it's not the years, honey, it's the mileage. And he's putting it out there like, I keep going out there to do these relic hunts and stuff and try to get this stuff reclaimed for museums, and I get the shit beat out of me pretty much every time I go out and do this. But yeah, and thank goodness Balak dies in this movie, because as you said, the Nazis always kind of seem to be a step ahead or are able to one-up him. Balak is absolutely always a step ahead of him. Like, he does all the work, and then Balak ends up claiming the treasure as his own. That happens twice in this movie, and they have that guy in their pocket. So it was going to be very difficult for Indy to get around that. It really is just kind of hubris that ends up doing the Nazis in, that they can just open the Ark and everything's going to be peachy keen. And then, of course, we get the iconic scene of the power of God or whatever resides within the Ark, kills everybody in the room that's looking, because I guess all you have to do is close your eyes and it'll spare you.
There was a line, depending on what version you watched. It wasn't originally in the theatrical release. A deleted scene that said explicitly that you can't look at it, which is why
is that when he showed it to him in his book? Like, he showed the picture of the Ark of the Covenant in the book, and they were asking, like, what's that coming out of it? And he was like, it's lightning or fire, like the power of God, whatever you want to call it, or something like that.
I think it was later in there. It was like, you can't look at it, and that's how Indy knew to close his eyes, because a lot of people criticized him for having that instinct. It was explained. They just took the dialogue out. Before we move on to the U-boat scene, because we're transitioning there, I did want to point out, I wrote in my notes, another little bit of slapstick humor in the film is when the Nazis are given these like melons. One of them takes one and he throws it at his dog.
And you hear the dog yelp.
Yeah, off screen. So, like, if we needed to point out that the Nazis were bad guys even more, they're out here throwing melons at dogs.
I don't have a ton to say about the U-boat scene. I mean, a U-boat catches up with Katanga, who I guess is like, he's a pirate. I mean, they clearly state he's a pirate. He ends up being a pretty stand-up guy. When they're boarded by the Nazis, Balak basically tries to, not Balak, Katanga basically says, take the Ark, I don't really care, but leave the girl, so that this whole ordeal was worth something to me and my men. Like, trying to get it to where, like, they leave Marion there so he can continue to protect her. And that's when Balak comes on and says, like, nope, that's mine, and basically takes her away. But yeah, other than that, the U-boat scene didn't really capture me, other than, like, they're looking for Indy. He ends up climbing up the side of it, and then Katanga and all of his men are, like, saluting him. But I feel like the next thing you know, they're docking at the substation that's on that island.
I mean, it has...
I don't even remember anything happening.
It has Indiana Jones pulling a Scooby-Doo and knocking out a Nazi and taking his uniform.
Yeah, once they reach the substation.
I feel like that scene was also important because it sets up that Balak doesn't... He says that he wants to be sure that the Ark is what it is, and he's not presenting the wrong thing to him. So that's why they're going to open it up and test it before they present it to him. Which makes a lot of sense. Right. Because although it would have worked out, in universe and in real life, if this all actually happened, it would have worked out way better if he just gave it to Hitler and Hitler opened it and World War II ended because fucking God intervened.
No, I mean, if there was ever a recruitment film to join a religion, it would have been that. Like, God stop the Nazis,
But that's why I think the scene was important, even though it wasn't. There was a shift in momentum going from the scene before it to the scene afterwards. There's kind of like a dip because everything kind of, even though there's still the conflict there, everything calms a little bit. There's not a lot of action going on. It's more so dialogue.
Well, and Dietrich is talking to Balak about, they're going to open the Ark and all this other stuff, but they're going to do this ritual, essentially, like this Hebrew piece where, again, it might have been, I don't know if it was a version problem and I just saw the wrong version of this. I don't remember what the Hebrew ritual stuff was supposed to even do or what it was supposed to be. But Balak was essentially trying to explain, like, this is why it's important, but I don't really recall what he said. And of course, the Nazi guy is not going to be comfortable with Jewish religious stuff.
Well, I know, in real life, Hebrew mythology, or religious mythology, whatever you want to call it, The Ark of the Covenant, you're not even supposed to touch it, let alone look at it.
Okay. So it's like a blessing he was doing or something?
I guess. I don't know. I don't know exactly.
Okay.
Their goals get a little bit muddled here, I think. All we really know is that they want to test it. They want to make sure it's on the up and up. At some point, Indiana Jones tries to get it back. Well, he kind of tries to stop him by threatening to just destroy it outright. But then Belloc's like,
he's got an RPG.
No, you ain't. No, you're not. No, you're not.
Yeah.
And it works.
Well, it was another one of those fun, like, parallels where essentially he even points out, like, you and I are basically the same. We just took different paths. And he was basically like, are you going to, basically sit idly by and then destroy this piece of history, or are you going to, be a part of history, essentially, and let us look at this thing and see what it's all about. And Indy's innate curiosity about being a doctor of, archaeology and all this other stuff, he inevitably relents on, I can't just blow this thing up because of how important it is to the world.
Which is another neat parallel between the two characters, too.
Yeah.
The way they interact with each other.
And so then we get the ultimate scene at the end.
I was about to say, are we just jumping right into that scene? Because holy shit.
Yeah.
Who the hell... There's a woman's face that comes out of the Ark.
Yeah.
Who the hell is that supposed to be?
That's a good question. So the Ark is full of sand. It was supposed to be the 10 Commandments as they were originally presented to... on stone tablets and stuff like that, presented to, I don't know religion very good, so I don't know who it was supposed to be presented to. I could say a name and it would be wrong. So there's supposed to be stone tablets in the Ark. Now it's essentially sand or like stone dust. They've essentially worn away. And yes, a bunch of magic and energy and all this other stuff starts floating around. And before we get the big moment with all the faces melting off, Balak comes face to face with a female spirit, and I have no idea who that's supposed to be.
When I looked it up to try to see if anything said it, it just said the Ark releases spirits, flames, and bolts. But that is very clearly a woman's face prominently there.
Yeah.
So I might have more looking up to do, or maybe it's not explained at all, which is fine. It doesn't need to be, but I was just wondering if they featured a face so prominently, like, that has to be someone. But anyway, jumping right into the scene everybody fucking came to hear us talk about. That face melting scene. Jesus Christ, that was brutal. That was even more brutal than I remembered it being when I've seen clips before.
Yeah.
What was that, stop motion? It feels like stop motion.
I think so, yeah. I mean, because there's a full-blown... there's like 2 face melts. One guy's head explodes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, in the background. I wrote that.
Yeah.
And a fire tornado.
Yeah. Yeah, I would guess that it's stop motion effect. That's what makes sense.
Because that's what they used in Hellraiser, and it's really weird comparing Indiana Jones to Hellraiser, but that scene looks like something straight out of a Clive Barker film. Definitely. It was super...
Or an Evil Dead.
Yeah, super impressive. Yeah, it does look like the one out of Evil Dead 2. It's not like I didn't just watch all of these. 2,
yeah,
I think. But like I said on that episode, Evil Dead 1 and 2 kind of like, one of them is the funny one. But yeah, that scene still holds up. That effect was pretty cool. It's awesome to see Belloc get his comeuppance, even though one could argue that Indy didn't really have anything to do with it, other than the fact that I guess he could have destroyed it, but then Belloc wouldn't have died, so that was awesome. That made, even if I wasn't vibing with the rest of the film before that, I think that scene would have at least had extremely high praise and bumped up my rating a little bit.
Yeah, no doubt. I figured you would have enjoyed that part. I mean, just with your interest in effects and well, yeah, just that, I guess. Your interest in the effects side of films, I thought that you were really going to enjoy that, and it definitely had a horror angle to it. It was horror adjacent for that couple of minutes there.
Yeah, it's one of those movies that has like there's certain films that are absolutely not horror films, like I mentioned. You know, stuff like The Goonies. I wouldn't say Gremlins because I'm still in the camp that is a horror movie also, even though it's also a family movie, because you can be both. But it's one of those films that has like a scene where it like Pee-wee's Big Adventure is another example. When you have Large Marge, like you have that one scene with horror elements, because you're not going to look me in the face and argue that scene doesn't have horror elements.
No. Or the scene with the clown.
Well, I haven't actually seen the movie. I just saw the scene.
Oh, okay. There's more than one scene in Pee-wee's Big Playhouse that you could Pee-wee's Big Playhouse, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I'm mixing up the TV show with the movie. Pee-wee's Big Adventure. There's another scene or two outside of Large Marge that you could argue are horror scenes. Yeah,
that scene, it was great, and afterwards, you know, because they have their eyes closed the whole time. Afterwards, we just transition back into like the final scene, the finale. Because they open their eyes and everyone's dead, and they're just like, well,
guess that's it. I guess that's all we need to do.
They go back to DC and secure the Ark and all, and he's like, where is it? And by the way, this ending, so I've seen this ending before, even though I did not know it was Indiana Jones. It was of all things, it was referenced in a Family Guy episode.
Okay, I could see that.
Where I don't even remember what happens in it, because it has nothing to do with the scene, as most things in Family Guy don't. But they mentioned something is gone with top men, and much like in the movie, there's just a warehouse full of crates. And that didn't make any sense to me in Family Guy, since I didn't know what it was referencing. And now that I've watched what it's referencing, it still doesn't make a lick of sense to me. Other than they have a bunch of shit like the Ark tucked away somewhere. That was...
Yeah, and it's essentially they have all these things and they don't intend to do anything with them except to keep them away from other people.
So... Well, don't make it sound interesting, because I'm trying to shit on it. Because you're making it sound like X-Files, and I love X-Files. It's one of my favorite shows. So don't go. I'm trying to say it's stupid, because the film could have ended with that scene and them being safe, but I guess they wanted to explain, okay, well, here's where the Ark ended up. But if the answer to that question was as unsatisfying as I found it, I would have preferred that it just been, you know, don't worry about it.
Nebulous.
Or just say, we have the Ark. Cool. Roll credits.
Yeah, I think they were definitely trying to kind of get in front of, like, people are going to ask what happened to this thing. And so they made a decision about where it went.
Yeah, but I don't like that. Even though you made me raise an eyebrow, I still don't like the whole top men thing. I don't like the delivery of that line, because it implies that, like, I should know who the hell these people are, and I have no idea. And
yeah, I wasn't a fan of the top men. I didn't get that either.
I don't know if it comes up again, but since evidently we're doing the rest of these damn things in the future, I'll find out eventually if it comes up again. Yeah. And I will definitely watch Raiders of the Lost Ark again before we start our Indiana Jones arc.
And I honestly think of no better way to kind of bring it to a close. I mean, I don't want to shut you down. So if you had other points, please, throw them out there. But we covered most of the big points in the film, and I feel like you just gave us your feelings on it. That, you're going to rewatch, or not, you're willing to rewatch this film because you intend to see the rest of them, which I feel like is, a pretty positive statement to make. That, and as you said earlier on, you enjoyed the film.
I mean, my final notes really are, this film really felt like a love letter to the adventure movies that came before it in a way that they hadn't been done before. It reminded me a lot of the same way a lot of films in the 50s were made, because there was a lot of those adventure type films with, granted, a smaller budget and everything. I like the way it, since it was set in the 1930s, I like the way it blended in the war of the time into the film and how violent it was for a PG film. The world building in the film was great, and it sets up, it's like the perfect setup of a franchise if that's what you're out to make. And I don't know if he was out to make a franchise or just a one-off, but
yeah,
I mean, you have two people that are extremely acclaimed. You have George Lucas and you have Steven Spielberg, so naturally they'd both come together and make something great.
Absolutely.
So my final rating is I gave it a 4 out of 5. Because, you know, as much as I don't think it was a perfect film, I thought it was fantastic, and it sucks that I didn't grow up with it.
Yeah, but, you know, it's one of those, I think, better late than never kind of things, and now you can kind of add it to your lexicon of, you know, films that you can talk about, you know, when you're in discussion about film with other people. This is one that you can now pull from, and as you know, rewatch and then get into the rest of the franchise, you'll be able to reference the other things about it too. But just prepare, because there are some warts. There's definitely some warts in the franchise, and, you know, you'll learn to appreciate Raiders even more because of those.
I'm especially interested in the books, because I feel like like I mentioned earlier, the choose your own adventure style books that apparently came out for completely original ideas of Indiana Jones' adventure. I feel like that translates incredibly well to that, because this film felt like it could be a child reading a choose your own adventure book, and this is what happens. Yeah.
Indy also would have made for a good Telltale Games topic.
Yeah, I don't think, unfortunately, I think Telltale is completely in the shitter now, though.
Yeah, I think they're dead. I'm not 100% sure, but I think so.
But there was a Lego game, and they don't make Lego games out of many franchises. Don't count Lego Dimensions, because that's the point of that game, is that it's like everything. But I think the only real things they've covered are Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, and Pirates of the Caribbean. Oh, and Marvel and DC.
And Marvel. Yeah.
So, like the heavy hitters of franchises.
Right.
So, you know, it earned its place in history as like one of those huge franchises that I'm sure the new one will make a shit ton of money.
Sure.
Especially being a franchise film. Especially releasing in June.
Yep. Yes.
I
agree.
I don't know when the original Raiders released, but I imagine it would have been a summer blockbuster.
Yeah, like, I don't know what month it came out. It makes sense, though, because that concept had already been established by Jaws in 75, so I assume it was a summer movie.
Yeah, but all in all, fantastic film. I look forward to the rest of them, and I'm glad I got my first needs to see done, because Lord knows there's a lot of films, especially since I want to go into film as a career. There's a lot of films that I, need to see. And this is a great opportunity to have an excuse to sit down and watch them all.
Oh, yeah. Well, with that in mind, folks, I think we're going to wrap it up for this week. I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and I hope you continue to listen and to support the show. You can find us on the social medias, specifically Twitter and Instagram at Screen Sermon. You can also find the Screen Sermon podcast on Facebook, and I would really love it if you would leave comments for us, direct messages, whatever you want to do to interact with us. And we also have our email, screensermonpod@gmail.com. Again, that's screensermonpod@gmail.com. Send us your feedback. Send us suggestions for things we should watch. We want to hear from you. We want to engage, and we want to have some good dialogue happening between the folks here at the Screen Sermon Show and the people that listen to it. This is all about having dialogue about movies. We get to do it, once a week, but we could be doing it so much more than that if we get to interact with you folks too. So reach out, And in the meantime, as we kind of talked about in the middle of this episode, look forward to format changes at the end of the summer. And in the meantime, we're going to continue to break films down as they come across, and trailers and what we're looking forward to, and just keep talking about this awesome thing to be interested in, which is movies and TV as well. We're going to start mixing some TV in there too. So thanks very much for listening. And Josh, thanks very much for soldiering on, considering what you're going through at the moment, and doing the episode with me. And I'm glad you enjoyed the movie.
Thank you for having me once again. I'll be back next week.
Yep, we'll be breaking down our top 4 most anticipated films for June, which should be a lot of fun because there's a lot of good stuff coming out. So we'll talk to you folks again next week, and we're looking forward to it.